a crown that came with a curse. Giuliana De Luca had spent years pretending she could outrun her last name. But when her father was assassinated, she was given to Salvatore Costa, a man who didn't ask for a wife, but took her anyway. He ran his thumb along her jaw, his voice a quiet threat. "You don't have to love me," he murmured, "but you will be mine." Chapter 1. The Shattered Mirror of the Past. The insistent ringing of the telephone sliced through the quiet hum of Giuliana De Luca's meticulously organized life. It was a sound that always brought a prickle of unease, a subtle tremor in the carefully constructed wall she'd built around her heart. She'd spent 15 years meticulously crafting a life divorced from her past, a life where De Luca was just a name, not a legacy stained with blood and whispered secrets. She'd been an art restorer, her life a quiet study in bringing beauty back from the brink of ruin. A life, she'd thought, that was finally her own. She picked up the receiver, her hand steady despite the knot of apprehension in her stomach. "Giuliana Rossi," she answered, the adopted surname a shield she'd wielded for years. "Signorina De Luca," a gruff voice corrected, the formality chilling her to the bone. "It is with regret that I inform you of your father's passing." The words, though expected in some distant, abstract way, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Don Antonio De Luca, the formidable head of one of New York's oldest mafia families, was dead. Assassinated, the voice on the other end clarified, a casualty of a power struggle that had been simmering beneath the surface of the city's underworld for years. Giuliana felt a strange detachment, a numbness that was more terrifying than grief. She hadn't seen her father in 15 years, not since she'd walked away from the opulent prison of their family mansion, trading gilded cages for a small, sun-drenched apartment and the quiet solitude of her work. She'd traded fear of her name for anonymity. "There are arrangements," the voice continued, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. "Your presence is required. Immediately." Giuliana closed her eyes, the scent of turpentine and aged canvas, the familiar comforts of her studio, suddenly feeling like a flimsy defense against the storm that was gathering. "Arrangements?" she echoed, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "A meeting with Signore Costa." The name was uttered with a reverence that bordered on fear, a name that even Giuliana, in her self-imposed exile, recognized. Salvatore Costa. The newly instated head of the Costa family, rivals turned reluctant allies of the De Lucas after a series of bloody conflicts. A man known for his ruthless efficiency and a coldness that could freeze hell over. The line went dead, leaving Giuliana standing in the middle of her carefully curated life, the shattered fragments of her past reflecting a future she never wanted. The carefully constructed walls of her existence were crumbling, the foundation built on the shaky premise of escape proving to be nothing more than an illusion. Her father's death had ripped a hole in the fabric of her reality, pulling her back into the world she desperately tried to leave behind. Later that evening, the black car sent to collect her glided through the rain-slicked streets of New York, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors that mirrored the turmoil within her. The driver, a silent, hulking figure, navigated the familiar route to the De Luca mansion, a sprawling fortress of stone and secrets nestled in the heart of the city's most exclusive neighborhood. The mansion, when she finally arrived, felt both alien and intimately familiar. The scent of old money and simmering tension hung heavy in the air, a suffocating reminder of the life she'd rejected. The grand foyer, with its marble floors and towering ceilings, echoed with the ghosts of her childhood, whispers of lavish parties and hushed conversations, of veiled threats and unspoken power plays. She was led through a maze of corridors, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her every move, judging her for her defection. The air grew thicker, heavier, the closer she got to the heart of the house, to the room where her father's body lay in state, surrounded by the somber rituals of a Mafia funeral. She paused at the threshold of the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The scene before her was a tableau of grief and power, weeping women dressed in black, stony-faced men exchanging veiled glances, the air thick with the scent of lilies and the unspoken threat of violence. And then she saw him.
Salvatore Costa.
He stood by the casket, a figure of imposing stillness amidst the controlled chaos. He was taller than she'd imagined, his presence radiating a dangerous charisma that was both terrifying and strangely compelling. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing a face that was both strikingly handsome and undeniably ruthless. His eyes, the color of obsidian, met hers across the room, and Juliana felt a shiver run down her spine. There was a predatory intensity in his gaze, a silent assessment that made her feel exposed, vulnerable. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was both an acknowledgement and a challenge. "Juliana DeLuca," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. "We have much to discuss." The discussion, as it turned out, was more of a decree. In the hushed, wood-paneled study, surrounded by the portraits of generations of Costa and DeLuca dons, Salvatore laid out the terms of her new reality. Her father, in his final act, had brokered a deal, a desperate attempt to secure peace and solidify the fragile alliance between the two families. "Your father owed a debt," Salvatore explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "A debt that can only be repaid with your hand." Juliana stared at him, the words echoing in the suffocating silence of the room. "My hand?" she repeated, the blood draining from her face. Salvatore's gaze was unwavering, his expression unreadable. "A marriage. To solidify the bond between our families. To ensure stability." The room spun, the ornate details of the study blurring into a dizzying vortex. Marriage. To Salvatore Costa. To a man she barely knew, a man who represented everything she'd tried to escape. It was a cruel irony, a twisted fate that had dragged her back into the very heart of the darkness she'd fled. She tried to speak, to protest, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? What argument could she possibly make that would sway a man like Salvatore Costa, a man who held her life, her future, in the palm of his hand? He rose from his chair, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. He circled her slowly, his presence filling the room, suffocating her with its intensity. He stopped in front of her, his gaze locking with hers, and Juliana felt a tremor of fear, mixed with a strange, unsettling fascination. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, the touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. It wasn't a gentle touch, but possessive, acclaiming. His thumb ran along her jaw, tracing the line of her bone structure, the pressure both a threat and a promise. "You don't have to love me," he murmured, his voice a quiet, dangerous whisper that seemed to seep into her very bones. "But you will be mine." His words hung in the air, a binding contract sealed not with ink and paper, but with the weight of generations of tradition, of blood oaths and unspoken power. Juliana looked into his dark, impenetrable eyes, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that her life, the life she'd so carefully constructed, was over. She was no longer Juliana Rossi, the art restorer. She was Juliana DeLuca, the Don's daughter, and now, the reluctant bride of Salvatore Costa. The cage door had slammed shut. The question was, would she ever find the key? Chapter 2. Shadows of a Gilded Cage. The days following her father's funeral were a blur of hushed conversations, somber rituals, and the ever-present, watchful gaze of Salvatore Costa. Juliana moved through the motions, a ghost in her own life, the opulent mansion feeling less like a home and more like a gilded cage. The staff, a mixture of long-serving family retainers and Costa's own loyal soldiers, treated her with a deference that bordered on fear, their eyes reflecting the unspoken power she now held as the future Signora Costa. Every attempt to speak, to voice that she would not do this, that her father had no right to trade her in this old-world custom, was met with the same unyielding wall. She was given a suite of rooms overlooking the sprawling gardens, a space that was both lavishly appointed and suffocatingly empty. The antique furniture, the silk drapes, The priceless artwork on the walls all served as constant reminders of the life she was being forced to embrace. She spent hours staring out the window, watching the rain fall on the manicured lawns, the gray skies mirroring the despair that had settled over her heart. The world outside, with its promise of freedom and anonymity, seemed impossibly distant, a world she could no longer reach. Salvatore was a constant presence, yet strangely distant. He treated her with a cool courtesy, a detached politeness that was more unsettling than outright hostility. He spoke of wedding arrangements, of merging the two families' businesses, of the responsibilities she would soon shoulder, as if she were a business acquisition rather than a woman being forced into a marriage she didn't want. He'd made no move to touch her beyond that first, possessive gesture in the study. Yet, she was acutely aware of him, of the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way his eyes seemed to see right through her. It was a constant, low-level hum of tension, a silent battle of wills being waged beneath the surface of polite conversation. One evening, after a particularly strange dinner, Juliana found herself wandering through the mansion's vast library. The room was a sanctuary of sorts, a place where she could lose herself in the familiar comfort of books, a world far removed from the suffocating reality of her situation. The scent of old paper and leather, the quiet hush of the room, offered a temporary respite from the turmoil within her. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her gaze drawn to a worn copy of the Divine Comedy. It was a book she'd loved as a child, a book her father had read to her, a rare glimpse of tenderness in a man who was otherwise defined by his ruthlessness. She pulled the book from the shelf, her fingers tracing the faded gold lettering, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. A fitting choice, a voice said from behind her, startling her. Salvatore stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the soft glow of the hallway lights. He was dressed in a dark suit, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Juliana closed the book, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I didn't hear you come in, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He moved into the room, his presence filling the space, diminishing the sense of sanctuary she'd found there. You seem drawn to stories of journeys through hell, he observed, his gaze fixed on the book in her hands. She met his eyes, a flicker of defiance in her own. Perhaps because I find myself in one, she replied, the words sharper than she intended. A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, or even respect crossed his face. A gilded cage is still a cage, Signorina De Luca, he acknowledged, his voice a low murmur. And you are the jailer, she said, the bitterness in her voice unmistakable. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was both an acknowledgement and a challenge. I am your husband-to-be, he corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. And I will protect what is mine. The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. She was his property, a pawn in a game of power and control. The thought was both terrifying and strangely intriguing. There was a raw honesty in his claim, a brutal directness that was a stark contrast to the veiled threats and unspoken manipulations that had characterized her life within the Mafia world. I am not a possession, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I am a woman with a mind and a will of my own. He stepped closer, his proximity making it difficult to breathe. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the worn cover of the book in her hands. And I intend to discover both, he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper that seemed to vibrate through the very air around her. He didn't touch her, not directly, but the space between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a dangerous energy that was both frightening and strangely exhilarating. He was challenging her, pushing her, forcing her to confront the reality of her situation, the reality of him. He was close enough that she could make out the subtle scent of his cologne, something dark and woodsy, with a hint of spice. It was a scent that was both sophisticated and primal, a reflection of the man himself. She found herself, against her will, taking a deeper breath, inhaling the scent, the essence of him. What do you want from me, Salvatore? She asked, the question a desperate plea, a challenge, a surrender all in one. His dark eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something there, a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of something that went beyond the cold, ruthless facade he presented to the world. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar mask of control. Obedience, he said, the word a soft, dangerous whisper. Loyalty. And perhaps, in time, understanding. He turned and walked away, leaving Juliana standing alone in the library, the book clutched tightly in her hands, the scent of his cologne lingering in the air, a constant reminder of the shadows that surrounded her, the shadows of the gilded cage she now inhabited. Would she ever find her way out of the darkness, or was she destined to remain a prisoner, bound to a man, a life, a world she desperately wanted to escape? The weight of the unknown pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Lion's Denver. The formal announcement of the engagement between Juliana DeLuca and Salvatore Costa sent ripples through the tightly knit world of the New York Mafia. It was a union that had been both anticipated and dreaded, a strategic alliance forged in the crucible of violence and loss. The engagement party, held in the grand ballroom of the Costa mansion, was a lavish display of power and wealth, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to quell rumors and solidify the family's newly merged position. Juliana, dressed in a gown of deep emerald green that Salvatore had chosen for her, a color that echoed the possessive glint in his eyes, felt like a stranger in a familiar land. The faces that swirled around her, the voices that murmured congratulations and veiled threats, were all part of a world she'd tried to leave behind. She moved through the crowd with a forced smile, her hand resting lightly on Salvatore's arm, the weight of his presence both a comfort and a constant reminder of her captivity. She caught snippets of conversations, whispers that spoke of power struggles, of old rivalries, of the delicate balance that held the underworld together. The names of other families, the Morettis, the Falcones, the Romanos, were uttered with a mixture of respect and fear, their alliances and vendettas a complex tapestry of betrayal and bloodshed. She noticed the way the older women, the matriarchs of the families, looked at her, their eyes assessing, judging, calculating. They were the keepers of tradition, the guardians of the old ways, and Juliana knew that she would be under their constant scrutiny, her every move, her every word, dissected and analyzed. One woman, in particular, caught her attention. Isabella Costa, Salvatore's aunt, a woman whose reputation for both ruthlessness and unwavering loyalty preceded her. She was a striking figure, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dark eyes sharp and intelligent. She approached Juliana with a measured grace, her expression unreadable. "Signorina DeLuca," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, yet laced with an undercurrent of steel. "Welcome to the family." Juliana met her gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. "Thank you, Signora Costa," she replied, the formality a shield against the woman's penetrating gaze. Isabella's eyes flickered over her, taking in every detail of her appearance, her demeanor. "You carry yourself with a certain reserve," she observed, her voice tinged with a hint of curiosity. "Not unlike my nephew." Juliana felt a prickle of unease. Was it a compliment, a warning, or simply an observation? She chose her words carefully. "I prefer to observe before I speak," she said, the statement a reflection of her cautious approach to this new, dangerous world. Isabella smiled, a thin, knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A wise strategy," she said. "In this world, silence is often more valuable than words." She paused, her gaze lingering on Juliana's face. "Salvatore is a complex man," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He carries the weight of our family's legacy, a burden that few can understand." Juliana felt a flicker of something. Sympathy? Curiosity? She wasn't sure. "I imagine it is a heavy burden," she replied, the words carefully neutral. Isabella nodded, her eyes darkening with a hint of sadness. "He has seen much darkness," she said. "He has done necessary things to protect our family, to maintain our position." She paused again, her gaze locking with Juliana's. He needs strength, she said, the word emphasized. He needs a woman who can stand beside him, not cower in his shadow. The words were a challenge, a veiled expectation. Juliana felt a surge of defiance, a refusal to be defined by Salvatore's world, by his expectations. I am not afraid of shadows, Signora Costa, she said, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. Isabella studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she smiled again, a genuine smile this time, a smile that reached her eyes. Perhaps, she said, there is more to you than meets the eye, Signorina De Luca. Perhaps you are exactly what Salvatore needs. The conversation left Juliana with a sense of unease, a feeling that she was being drawn into a web of secrets and expectations that she didn't fully understand. Isabella's words, her veiled warnings and subtle encouragement, echoed in her mind, adding another layer of complexity to the already fraught relationship with Salvatore. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, Salvatore found her standing alone on the balcony, overlooking the city lights. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere of the ballroom. You seem distant, he said, his voice a low murmur, his presence behind her sending a shiver down her spine. She turned to face him, her expression carefully guarded. I am simply observing, she replied, echoing Isabella's earlier words. He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Observing what? He asked, his voice tinged with a hint of curiosity. She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. The intricacies of your world, she said finally. The alliances, the rivalries, the expectations. He moved closer, his proximity making it difficult to breathe. And what do you make of it all? He asked, his voice a low, resonant whisper. She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her own. I find it suffocating, she said, the word honest and raw. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. It is a world of responsibilities, he said. Of obligations. Of loyalty.
And what of freedom?
She asked, the question a desperate plea, a challenge, a surrender all in one. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, the touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. It was a familiar gesture, possessive, claiming, yet this time, there was a hint of something else, a flicker of tenderness. Freedom, he said, his voice a soft, dangerous whisper, is a luxury we cannot afford. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. But perhaps, he murmured, within the confines of our world, we can find something else. Something more. His words hung in the air, a promise, a threat, a mystery. Juliana looked into his dark, impenetrable eyes, and she felt a pull, a dangerous attraction that defied logic, defied reason, defied everything she thought she knew about herself. The lion's den was closing in, and she was no longer sure she wanted to escape. The whispers of the underworld were starting to sound like a siren's song, a dangerous melody she couldn't resist. Chapter 4. The Weight of Unseen Chains. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to showcase the unity and power of the newly merged Costa and De Luca families. Juliana found herself swept up in a tide of fittings, meetings, and social engagements, her days a blur of silk, lace, and the ever-present scrutiny of the Mafia world. She learned to navigate the complex social dynamics, to decipher the veiled threats and unspoken alliances, to play the role of the dutiful bride-to-be. She smiled when she was expected to smile, spoke when she was expected to speak, and kept her true feelings, her doubts and fears, hidden beneath a carefully constructed facade. But the weight of the unseen chains that bound her to Salvatore, to this life, grew heavier with each passing day. She felt like a bird in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury and privilege, yet deprived of the one thing she craved most: freedom. She found solace in small, stolen moments. Early morning walks in the sprawling gardens of the Costa estate, the scent of roses and damp earth a temporary escape from the suffocating atmosphere of the mansion. Late-night conversations with Elena, a young maid who had been assigned to her, a woman who, despite her position, possessed a quiet strength and a surprisingly insightful perspective on the intricacies of the Mafia world. Elena, unlike the other staff, treated Juliana not as a figure of power, but as a woman, a human being caught in a difficult situation. She listened without judgment, offered words of comfort and encouragement, and helped Juliana navigate the unspoken rules and expectations of her new life. "He is not a bad man, Signora," Elena said one evening, as she helped Juliana prepare for bed. "He is hardened by life, by duty, by the expectations of his family." Juliana looked at her reflection in the mirror, her face pale and drawn, the weight of her situation etched in the lines around her eyes. "He is a jailer," she said, the words bitter and resentful. Elena shook her head, her expression sympathetic. "He is also a protector," she said. "He will keep you safe. In this world, that is everything." Juliana knew that Elena was right in a way. Salvatore was a powerful man, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He would protect her from the dangers of the outside world, from the rival families, from the constant threat of violence that hung over their lives. But what about the dangers within? The dangers of losing herself, of becoming a mere extension of Salvatore, of sacrificing her own identity, her own dreams, on the altar of family loyalty and tradition? One afternoon, while exploring the mansion, Juliana stumbled upon a hidden room, a small, dusty studio filled with art supplies. Canvases, brushes, paints, easels all lay dormant, covered in a thick layer of dust, a testament to a life, a passion that had been abandoned. She learned from Elena that the studio had belonged to Salvatore's mother, a woman who had died young, a woman who had possessed a talent for painting, a talent that had been suppressed, deemed unsuitable for the wife of a Mafia don. Juliana felt a pang of recognition, a sense of kinship with this woman she had never met. She saw in the dusty canvases, in the neglected brushes, a reflection of her own fears, of the possibility of her own artistic passion being stifled, buried beneath the weight of her new life. She began to spend time in the studio, cleaning, organizing, bringing order back to the neglected space. She touched the canvases, felt the texture of the dried paint, imagined the woman who had created them, the emotions that had flowed onto the canvas. She found a box of charcoal pencils and a sketch pad, and one evening, she began to draw. At first, her hand was hesitant, unsure, but as she lost herself in the process, the lines became bolder, more confident. She drew the gardens, the mansion, the faces of the people around her, capturing their expressions, their hidden emotions, the unspoken stories that lay beneath the surface. She drew Salvatore. She drew him as she saw him, not as the cold, ruthless Don, but as the man beneath the mask, the man burdened by responsibility, by the weight of his family's legacy. She captured the sadness in his eyes, the hint of vulnerability that he tried so hard to conceal. She hid the sketches, knowing that they were a betrayal of sorts, a glimpse into her private world, a world she wasn't ready to share with Salvatore, with anyone. But the act of drawing, of creating, gave her a sense of purpose, a sense of connection to herself, a reminder that she was more than just the Don's reluctant bride. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the unseen chains that bound her. But would it be enough to sustain her in the darkness that surrounded her? Or would the weight of those chains ultimately crush her spirit, leaving her nothing more than a hollow shell, a reflection of the woman she once was? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her situation. Chapter 5. A Dance of Defiance and Desire. The night before the wedding, Juliana couldn't sleep. The mansion was quiet, the preparations complete, the guests all tucked away in their lavish suites. But Juliana felt a restless energy, a sense of impending doom mixed with a strange, unsettling anticipation. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in a silk robe, and wandered out onto the balcony. The city lights twinkled below, a vast, glittering expanse that seemed to mock her captivity. She leaned against the railing, the cool night air on her skin, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear, resentment, and a growing, undeniable fascination with the man she was about to marry. She thought of the sketches she'd made of him, the hidden vulnerability she'd captured in his eyes, the weight of responsibility that seemed to bow his shoulders. She thought of his words, his touch, the possessive way he looked at her, the way he seemed to see through her carefully constructed defenses. She was drawn to him, she realized, against her will, against her better judgment. There was a raw power in him, a dangerous charisma that was both terrifying and strangely alluring. He was a force of nature, a storm that threatened to consume her, yet she found herself drawn to the eye of the storm, to the calm center of his being, the place where she sensed a hint of something more, something human, something vulnerable. She heard a soft sound behind her and turned to see Salvatore standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the bedroom. He was dressed in a dark robe, his hair tousled, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through the night air. She shook her head, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Too much to think about," she replied, the words honest and raw. He moved closer, his presence filling the space, diminishing the vastness of the city, the distance between them. "Regrets?" he asked, his voice tinged with a hint of something.
Concern?
"Uncertainty?" She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her own. "Doubts," she corrected.
Fears.
He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Marriage is a leap of faith," he said. "Even in our world." "Especially in your world," she countered, the words laced with a hint of bitterness. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, the touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. It was a familiar gesture, possessive, claiming, yet tonight, it felt different, gentler, more intimate. "I will not lie to you, Juliana," he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper. "This marriage is a necessity.
A stratégique alliance.
But it does not have to be a prison." She searched his eyes, looking for a hint of deception, a flicker of insincerity. But she saw only honesty, a raw, unfiltered truth that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. "What do you want from me, Salvatore?" she asked, the question she'd asked him before, but this time it felt different, more personal, more vulnerable. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I want your strength," he said, the words echoing Isabella's earlier assessment. "Your intelligence. Your fire." He paused, his gaze lingering on her lips. "And yes," he admitted, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, "I want your desire." The word hung in the air, a spark that ignited a flame within her. She felt a heat rise in her cheeks, a tingling sensation spread through her body. She was afraid of him, yes, but she was also drawn to him, undeniably, powerfully. He stepped back, breaking the spell, the intensity of the moment. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice regaining its familiar coolness, "you will be my wife. You will be Signora Costa. You will stand beside me, and you will face whatever comes together." He turned and walked away, leaving Juliana standing alone on the balcony, the city lights a blur before her eyes, the weight of his words, his touch, his presence, lingering in the air. The dance of defiance and desire had begun, a dangerous, exhilarating dance that would test her strength, her will, her very soul. Would she be consumed by the flames, or would she emerge from the fire, forged anew, stronger, more resilient, a woman who could stand beside Salvatore Costa, not as a prisoner, but as an equal, a partner, a lover? The answer lay in the uncertain future, in the shadows of the wedding night, in the depths of the lion's den she was about to enter. Chapter 6. Echoes of a Forgotten Life. The wedding was a spectacle of opulent grandeur, a carefully orchestrated display of power and wealth designed to impress and intimidate. The cathedral, adorned with thousands of white roses and lilies, echoed with the solemn vows, the hushed whispers of the guests, the weight of generations of tradition. Juliana, dressed in a gown of intricate lace and flowing silk, felt like an actress in a play, her movements, her words, dictated by a script she hadn't written. She saw the faces of her former life, friends and colleagues from the art world, their expressions a mixture of surprise, confusion, and a hint of pity. They were reminders of the life she'd left behind, the life of freedom and independence she'd so desperately craved. She caught the eye of Marco, her former mentor, a man who had encouraged her talent, nurtured her passion for art. He gave her a small, sad smile, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice she was making. The reception, held in the grand ballroom of the Costa mansion, was a lavish affair, a sea of glittering jewels, expensive suits, and veiled conversations. Juliana moved through the crowd with a forced smile, her hand resting lightly on Salvatore's arm, the weight of his presence a constant reminder of her new reality. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see a familiar face, a woman she hadn't seen in years. Isabella Rossi, her aunt, her mother's sister, the only member of her family who had supported her decision to leave the Mafia world. "Juliana," Isabella said, her voice filled with a mixture of warmth and concern. "My dear, you look beautiful, but also sad." Juliana felt a lump form in her throat, the carefully constructed facade she'd maintained throughout the day threatening to crumble. "Aunt Isabella," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think you would come." Isabella embraced her, her arms strong and comforting. "I wouldn't miss it," she said, "even if I don't approve of the circumstances." She pulled back, her eyes searching Juliana's face. "Are you all right?" she asked, the question filled with genuine concern. Juliana hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I am adjusting," she said, the words carefully chosen. Isabella nodded, her expression understanding. "It's not an easy life, Juliana," she said. "But you are strong. Stronger than you know." She paused, her gaze lingering on Salvatore, who stood a few feet away, talking to a group of men. "He is a powerful man," she said. "But he is also a man, with his own vulnerabilities." Juliana felt a flicker of surprise. It was the second time someone had hinted at Salvatore's hidden depths, his vulnerability. First Isabella Costa, and now her own aunt. It was a perspective that challenged her own perceptions, her own fears. "I know he cares for you, Juliana," Isabella continued. "In his own way. He chose you. He could have had any woman, but he chose you." "He was given no choice, you mean?" Juliana reminded, a slight edge to her voice. "Nonsense. He made a choice, the moment he lay eyes upon you. And he doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. Remember that." The conversation gave Juliana a moment of clarity. She may have been maneuvered, manipulated even, but he had gone along with it. He had accepted her. And, a small voice whispered, he wanted her. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the mansion had fallen silent, Juliana found herself alone in her new suite of rooms, the echoes of the day's events swirling around her. She removed the elaborate gown, the heavy jewelry, the symbols of her new status, and slipped into a simple silk robe. She walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome relief from the stifling atmosphere of the reception. She looked out at the city lights, the familiar skyline, and felt a pang of longing for her former life, for the freedom and independence she'd lost. She heard a soft sound behind her and turned to see Salvatore standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a dark suit, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "You are quiet," he said, his voice a low murmur. She shrugged, her gaze returning to the city lights. "Reflecting," she replied, "on everything." He moved closer, his presence filling the space, diminishing the distance between them. "On your former life?" he asked, his voice tinged with a hint of jealousy. She met his gaze, a flicker of defiance in her own. "On the choices I made," she said. "And the choices that were made for me." He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I know this is not the life you wanted, Juliana," he said. "But I will do everything in my power to make it bearable." "Bearable?" she repeated, the word laced with a hint of sarcasm. "Is that all I can hope for?" He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, the touch sending a familiar jolt of electricity through her. "Perhaps," he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper. We can hope for more. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. You are my wife now, Juliana, he murmured. And I intend to get to know you. All of you. His words, his touch, his presence, ignited a spark within her, a flame of desire that had been smoldering beneath the surface of her fear and resentment. She was his wife, yes, but she was also a woman, with her own desires, her own needs. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a possibility that this marriage, this forced union, might become something more, something real, something worth fighting for. The echoes of her forgotten life still lingered, but they were fading, replaced by the growing intensity of the present, the promise of a future she couldn't yet imagine, a future that lay in the hands of the man standing before her, the man who was both her jailer and her lover. Chapter 7. The Thorns of a Promised Rose. The first few weeks of married life were a strange dance of adjustment and discovery. Juliana found herself navigating the complexities of the Costa household, learning the unspoken rules, the subtle power dynamics, the expectations that came with being Signora Costa. She spent her days exploring the mansion, getting to know the staff, and slowly, tentatively, building a relationship with Salvatore. He was a man of contradictions, she discovered. Cold and ruthless in business, yet capable of surprising moments of tenderness and humor. He was fiercely protective of her, yet also demanding, expecting her to embrace her role as his wife, to adapt to his world, his rules. She continued to find solace in the hidden art studio, spending hours sketching and painting, capturing the faces and landscapes of her new life. She didn't show her work to anyone, keeping it a secret, a private refuge from the pressures and expectations of her public role. One evening, Salvatore found her there, standing before an easel, lost in her work. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her, his expression unreadable. I didn't know you were an artist, he said finally, his voice breaking the silence. Juliana turned, startled, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She quickly covered the canvas, a half-finished portrait of him, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. It's just a hobby, she said, her voice dismissive. He moved into the room, his presence filling the space, diminishing the sense of sanctuary she'd found there. He reached out, his fingers gently uncovering the canvas, revealing the portrait. He studied it for a long moment, his dark eyes intense, searching. You see more than others do, he said finally, his voice a low murmur. She met his gaze, her own expression uncertain. I see what is there, she replied, the words honest and raw. He looked at her, his gaze lingering on her face, her eyes, her lips. And what do you see in me? He asked, his voice a low, resonant whisper. She hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. I see strength, she said.
And sadness.
And a loneliness that mirrors my own. He nodded, his expression softening slightly. We are both prisoners of our circumstances, Juliana, he said. Bound by duty, by family, by expectations. He stepped closer, his proximity making it difficult to breathe. He reached out, his fingers tracing the lines of her face, the curve of her cheek, the softness of her lips. But perhaps, he said, his voice a soft, dangerous whisper, we can find a different kind of freedom. Together. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, exploratory kiss that sent a shiver of anticipation through her. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a connection that was growing stronger, deeper, with each passing day. She responded, hesitantly at first, then with a growing passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a promise of a future that was uncertain, yet filled with a dangerous, exhilarating possibility. But their newfound intimacy was soon tested by the realities of their world. A rival family, the Morettas, made a move, a subtle act of aggression that threatened the fragile peace between the families. Salvatore became more distant, more preoccupied, his focus shifting to the business, to the constant threat of violence that hung over their lives. Juliana felt a growing sense of isolation, a reminder that she was still an outsider, a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. She tried to talk to Salvatore, to understand what was happening, but he brushed her off, his answers curt, his expression guarded. "This is not your concern, Juliana," he said, his voice cold and distant. "This is men's business." The word stung, a reminder of the chasm that still existed between them, the difference in their worlds, their experiences. She felt a surge of anger, of resentment, a refusal to be relegated to the sidelines, to be treated as a child, a possession. "I am your wife, Salvatore," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I am part of this family. I have a right to know what is happening." He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and something else. "Respect? Admiration? This world is dangerous, Juliana," he said. "I am trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection," she retorted, her voice rising. "I need your trust. Your honesty." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his expression weary. "Trust is a rare commodity in this world, Juliana," he said. "And honesty can be a deadly weapon." He paused, his gaze locking with hers.
"But I will tell you this," he said.
"The Morettis are testing us. They're looking for a weakness, and they will not find one." His words, his tone, sent a shiver down her spine. The thorns of the promised rose were sharp, and the threat of violence, of bloodshed, was a constant, looming presence. She was married to a Mafia don, and the reality of that life, the danger, the uncertainty, was becoming increasingly clear. The path ahead was fraught with peril, and she knew that she would need all her strength, all her courage, to navigate it, to survive it, to find a way to build a life, a love, within the confines of this dangerous, exhilarating world. Chapter 8. Beneath the surface of silence. The tension between the Costas and the Morettis escalated, casting a long shadow over the mansion and its inhabitants. Juliana felt the shift in atmosphere, the increased security, the hushed conversations, the constant presence of armed guards. Salvatore was often absent, attending meetings, making calls, his face a mask of grim determination. She tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, continuing her work in the art studio, finding solace in the familiar routine of sketching and painting. But the fear, the uncertainty, gnawed at her, making it difficult to focus, to lose herself in her art. She missed the easy intimacy she'd shared with Salvatore, the stolen moments of connection, the tentative steps they'd taken towards building a real relationship. She felt like she was losing him, slipping back into the role of the outsider, the pawn in a game she didn't understand. One evening, she decided to confront him. She found him in his study, poring over documents, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of the desk lamp. He looked tired, the lines of strain etched around his eyes, his mouth. "Salvatore," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." He looked up, his expression guarded. "About what?" he asked, his voice curt. She moved into the room, closing the door behind her.
"About us," she said.
"About what is happening. About the distance between us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I told you, Juliana," he said. "This is not your concern." "And I told you," she countered, her voice rising, "that I am your wife. I am part of this family. I deserve to know what is going on." He stood up, his tall frame towering over her. "This is a dangerous situation, Juliana," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The Morettis are making threats. They are trying to provoke us." "And what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He met her gaze, his dark eyes filled with a cold intensity. "Whatever is necessary," he said. "To protect our family. To protect you." The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. He was a dangerous man, capable of violence, of ruthlessness. But he was also her husband, the man she was beginning to love, despite her fears, despite her doubts. "I don't want you to protect me by shutting me out," she said, her voice softening. "I want you to trust me.
To let me in."
He hesitated, his expression conflicted. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheek. Trust is earned, Juliana, he said. And in this world, it is often betrayed. Then let me earn it, she said, her voice a desperate plea. Let me show you that I am not a liability, that I can be an asset. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze searching her face. He saw the determination in her eyes, the strength in her stance, the unwavering loyalty that she offered him. He saw something else, too. He saw the love that she was trying so hard to conceal, the love that had blossomed in the darkness, against all odds. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, exploratory kiss that deepened into a passionate embrace. It was a kiss that spoke of need, of desire, of a connection that went beyond the boundaries of their forced marriage. All right, Juliana, he said, his voice husky with emotion.
I will tell you what is happening.
But you must listen carefully. And you must trust me. He proceeded to explain the situation, the history of the conflict with the Morettas, the threats they had made, the delicate negotiations that were underway. He spoke of the risks, the dangers, the potential for violence. Juliana listened intently, her mind racing, absorbing the information, understanding the stakes. She realized that she was no longer just an observer, a bystander. She was a player in this game, whether she wanted to be or not. What can I do? She asked, her voice calm and resolute. He looked at her, surprised by her question.
You can stay safe, he said.
Stay out of it. She shook her head, her expression determined.
No, she said.
I can do more than that. I can help. She had an idea, a risky idea, but one that might offer a solution, a way to de-escalate the situation, to avoid bloodshed. It was a long shot, but she had to try. She had to prove to Salvatore, to herself, that she was more than just the Don's reluctant bride. She was a woman of strength, of intelligence, of courage. And she was ready to fight for her husband, for her family, for her love. The silence between them had been broken, and beneath the surface, a new understanding, a new partnership, was beginning to emerge. Chapter 9. Cracks in the Foundation of Fear. Juliana's idea was audacious, bordering on reckless. She proposed using her connections in the art world, specifically her former mentor, Marco, to facilitate a discreet meeting with Lorenzo Moretti, the head of the rival family. The art world, with its network of wealthy collectors and international dealings, often intersected with the Mafia's illicit activities, providing a neutral ground, a space where conversations could happen without the usual posturing and threats. Salvatore was initially resistant, his protective instincts warring with his growing respect for Juliana's intelligence and determination. He was concerned for her safety, unwilling to expose her to the potential dangers of dealing directly with the Morettas. This is too risky, Juliana, he said, his voice firm. Lorenzo Moretti is a dangerous man. He is not to be trusted. And you are? She countered, her voice laced with a hint of sarcasm. Are you any less dangerous? Any more trustworthy? He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. I am your husband, he said. I will protect you. I don't need your protection, Salvatore, she said. I need your partnership, your trust. She explained her plan in detail, outlining how she would approach Marco, how she would frame the meeting as a discussion about a potential art acquisition, a way to mask the true purpose of the encounter. She emphasized the importance of discretion, of avoiding any direct confrontation, of using diplomacy and negotiation rather than violence. He listened intently, his mind weighing the risks and the potential benefits. He knew that Juliana was right, that a direct confrontation with the Morettas could lead to a bloody war, a war that would cost lives, disrupt their business, and destabilize the fragile peace that held the underworld together. He also knew that Juliana was offering him something more than just a solution to a problem. She was offering him a chance to build a different kind of relationship, a partnership based on trust, on respect, on a shared understanding of the challenges they faced. All right, Juliana, he said finally, his voice softening. We will do it your way. But we will do it together. He insisted on accompanying her, providing security, ensuring her safety. He also laid down some ground rules, strict instructions about what she could and could not say, how she should conduct herself, how she should respond to any potential threats. Juliana agreed to his conditions, understanding his concerns, appreciating his protectiveness, even as she chafed under the restrictions. She knew that she was walking a tightrope, balancing her desire for independence with the realities of the dangerous world she now inhabited. The meeting with Marco was tense but productive. Juliana, using her knowledge of the art world, her charm, and her carefully crafted persona, convinced him to reach out to Lorenzo Moretti to propose a meeting, a discussion about a potential art deal. Marco, unaware of the true nature of the encounter, agreed to facilitate the introduction, seeing it as an opportunity to expand his own business, to gain access to the lucrative world of mafia money. A few days later, the meeting was arranged. It was to take place in a neutral location, a discreet art gallery in a quiet part of the city. Salvatore, accompanied by a small team of his most trusted men, provided security, remaining in the background, observing, assessing, ready to intervene if necessary. Juliana, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, her demeanor calm and confident, met Lorenzo Moretti. He was an older man, his face lined with the scars of a life lived on the edge, his eyes cold and calculating. He was accompanied by his own entourage, a group of silent, menacing figures. The conversation was tense, a delicate dance of veiled threats and unspoken power plays. Juliana, using her skills of diplomacy and negotiation, steered the conversation away from the immediate conflict, focusing instead on the potential for mutual benefit, for cooperation, for a peaceful resolution. She spoke of shared interests, of the need to maintain stability, of the dangers of escalating the conflict, of the potential for bloodshed and loss on both sides. She appealed to his sense of reason, his self-preservation, his desire to protect his own family, his own interests. Lorenzo Moretti listened intently, his expression unreadable. He was a shrewd man, a master of manipulation, and he was not easily swayed. But Juliana persisted, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering, her determination fueled by her love for Salvatore, her desire to protect him, to build a better future for them both. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of respect, perhaps, or even understanding. He was testing her, probing her, looking for a weakness. But she didn't falter, didn't back down. Finally, after a long and tense conversation, he agreed to a truce, a temporary cessation of hostilities, a chance to negotiate a more permanent solution. It was a small victory, a fragile step towards peace, but it was a victory nonetheless. As they left the gallery, Juliana felt a surge of relief, of triumph. She had done it. She had faced down a dangerous man, a powerful enemy, and she had prevailed. She had proven her worth, her strength, her courage. Salvatore, his expression still guarded, but his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and admiration, took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You did well, Juliana," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You were magnificent." His words, his touch, were a reward, a recognition of her contribution, her value. The cracks in the foundation of fear were beginning to widen, and a new foundation, built on trust, on respect, on a shared understanding, was beginning to emerge. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Juliana felt a sense of hope, a belief that she could not only survive in this world, but thrive, alongside the man she was beginning to love, the man who was slowly, tentatively, beginning to love her in return. Chapter 10. The Unveiling of Hidden Truths. The truce with the Morettis, fragile as it was, provided a much-needed respite, a chance for both families to regroup, to reassess their positions, to explore the possibility of a more lasting peace. Salvatore, emboldened by Juliana's success, began to involve her more directly in the family business, seeking her advice, valuing her insights, treating her as a true partner. He shared with her the details of their operations, the legitimate businesses that served as a front for their illicit activities, the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define the underworld. He introduced her to his key lieutenants, the men who ran the day-to-day operations, the men who had previously viewed her with suspicion and distrust. Juliana, in turn, began to understand the complexities of Salvatore's world, the pressures he faced, the constant threat of violence, the burden of responsibility he carried. She saw the toll it took on him, the lines of strain around his eyes, the weariness in his voice, the constant vigilance that never left him.
She also saw something else.
She saw the genuine care he had for his people, his loyalty to his family, his desire to protect them, to provide for them, even if it meant operating outside the law, even if it meant resorting to violence. She began to see him not just as a mafia don, a cold and ruthless figure, but as a man, a complex, flawed human being, trapped by circumstance, by tradition, by the weight of his family's legacy. One evening, while they were having dinner in the privacy of their suite, Salvatore shared with her a story from his past, a story that revealed a hidden truth about his character, a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. He told her about his mother, the artist whose studio Juliana had discovered, the woman who had died young, a victim of a rival family's attack. He spoke of her kindness, her gentleness, her passion for art, a passion that had been stifled by the expectations of her role as the wife of a mafia don. She was different, he said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and longing. She saw the world differently. She saw the beauty in everything, even in the darkness. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window, to the city lights beyond. She tried to teach me, he continued, to show me that there was more to life than power and violence. But I didn't listen. I was too young, too foolish. He looked at Juliana, his eyes filled with regret. After she died, he said, I shut myself off. I became hard, ruthless. I vowed to protect our family, to avenge her death, to never let anyone hurt us again. Juliana reached out, her hand covering his, her touch gentle and comforting. I understand, she said, her voice soft. I understand the pain of loss, the desire for revenge. She thought of her own father, his assassination, the anger and resentment she'd felt, the desire to escape, to run away from the pain. She realized that she and Salvatore were more alike than she'd thought, both scarred by loss, both shaped by the violence of their world. But revenge, she said, doesn't bring peace, Salvatore. It only perpetuates the cycle of violence. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. I know, he said, but it is difficult to break free.
To change.
It's not impossible, she said, her voice firm and resolute. We can choose a different path.
Together.
Her words, her belief in him, her unwavering support, gave him strength, a renewed sense of hope. He realized that Juliana was not just his wife, his partner, she was his salvation. She was the light in his darkness, the beauty in his world, the reminder that there was more to life than power and violence. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both passionate and tender, a kiss that sealed their bond, a promise of a future that was uncertain, yet filled with the possibility of change, of redemption, of a love that could transcend the darkness of their world. The unveiling of hidden truths, the sharing of vulnerabilities, had brought them closer, forging a deeper connection, a stronger foundation for their relationship. They were still navigating a dangerous world, still facing threats and challenges, but they were doing it together as equals, as partners, as lovers. The Mafia Don and his reluctant bride were becoming something more, something real, something unbreakable. Chapter 11. A tapestry of tears and trust. The relative calm that followed the truce with the Morettis was shattered by an unexpected betrayal. One of Salvatore's most trusted lieutenants, a man named Ricardo, was discovered to be working with a rival family, feeding them information, plotting against the Costas. The revelation sent shockwaves through the household, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion. Salvatore was furious, his sense of betrayal profound. He had trusted Ricardo, treated him like family, and the discovery that he had been working against them all along was a bitter pill to swallow. Juliana saw the pain in his eyes, the anger that simmered beneath the surface, the vulnerability he tried so hard to conceal. She knew that this betrayal had wounded him deeply, shaken his faith in the people around him, in a loyalty that was supposed to be the bedrock of their world. I trusted him, Juliana, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I treated him like a brother. And he betrayed me. She reached out, her hand covering his, her touch gentle and comforting.
I know, she said.
It hurts. It's a violation. She understood the feeling, the sense of betrayal, the anger and resentment that consumed him. She had felt it herself when she'd learned of her father's arrangement, the way he had traded her like a pawn in a game of power. What will you do? She asked, her voice soft. He met her gaze, his dark eyes filled with a cold intensity. What I must, he said. What is expected? She knew what that meant. Retribution. Violence. A brutal response that would send a message to anyone else who dared to betray the Costas. But she also knew that there was another way. A way that might break the cycle of violence, that might offer a chance for healing, for a different kind of future. There is another option, Salvatore, she said, her voice firm and resolute. A way to show strength without resorting to bloodshed. He looked at her, his expression skeptical. What are you suggesting?
He asked.
She explained her idea, a plan that involved exposing Ricardo's betrayal publicly, using the evidence they had gathered to discredit him, to strip him of his power, to make him an outcast, a pariah in the underworld. It was a risky strategy, one that could backfire, one that could be seen as a sign of weakness. But it was also a chance to demonstrate a different kind of power, a power that came not from violence, but from intelligence, from strategy, from a refusal to be drawn into the endless cycle of revenge. Salvatore listened intently, his mind weighing the risks and the potential benefits. He knew that Juliana was right, that violence only begot more violence, that there had to be a better way. But he also knew that the old ways were deeply ingrained, that the expectation of retribution was strong, that his own men might see anything less than a brutal response as a sign of weakness. This is unconventional, Juliana, he said. It goes against everything we know. But it's also a chance to change things, she said. To show that we are different. To build a better future. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and love. He saw the strength in her, the courage, the unwavering belief in a better way. He realized that she was not just his wife, his partner, she was his conscience. She was the voice of reason, the voice of hope, the voice of change. All right, Juliana, he said finally, his voice softening. We will do it your way. But we will do it together. They worked together, gathering the evidence, preparing the presentation, crafting the narrative that would expose Ricardo's betrayal and strip him of his power. They presented their findings to the other families, to the key players in the underworld, demonstrating Ricardo's treachery, his duplicity, his unworthiness. It was a tense and dramatic confrontation, a high-stakes gamble that could have easily gone wrong. But Juliana and Salvatore stood together, united, their strength and determination unwavering. In the end, they prevailed. Ricardo was discredited, ostracized, his power broken. He was banished from the underworld, a living example of the consequences of betrayal. It was a victory for Juliana and Salvatore, a victory for their vision of a different kind of future. They had shown that strength could come not just from violence, but from intelligence, from strategy, from a commitment to justice. The tapestry of their relationship was woven with tears and trust, with pain and forgiveness, with the shared experience of navigating a dangerous world, of fighting for a better way. They were still the Mafia Don and his reluctant bride, but they were also something more, something stronger, something unbreakable. They were partners, lovers, allies, bound together by a love that had grown in the darkness, a love that was transforming their world, one step at a time. Chapter 12. The Price of Loyalty and Love. The success of their unconventional approach to Ricardo's betrayal had a ripple effect throughout the underworld. Other families, witnessing the Costa's strength and resolve, began to reconsider their own methods, their own reliance on violence and intimidation. A tentative dialogue began, a cautious exploration of alternative ways to resolve conflicts, to manage disputes, to build a more stable and sustainable future. Juliana, with her diplomatic skills and her connections in the art world, became an increasingly important figure in these negotiations, facilitating conversations, mediating disputes, building bridges between rival families. She was no longer just the Don's wife. She was a respected and influential player in her own right, her voice heard, her opinions valued. Salvatore, in turn, continued to evolve, to grow, to embrace a new vision of leadership, one that prioritized diplomacy and negotiation over brute force. He saw the positive impact Juliana had on their world, the respect she commanded, the way she was able to defuse tensions, to build consensus, to create a sense of shared purpose. He realized that he had found not just a wife, but a true partner, a woman who complemented his strengths, challenged his weaknesses, and helped him to become a better man, a better leader. Their relationship deepened, their love growing stronger with each passing day. They shared moments of intimacy, of tenderness, of quiet conversation, building a bond that transcended the boundaries of their arranged marriage, their forced union. But the path to peace was not without its obstacles. There were still those who clung to the old ways, who resisted change, who saw Juliana's influence as a threat, who viewed Salvatore's new approach as a sign of weakness. One of those individuals was Isabella Costa, Salvatore's aunt, the woman who had initially welcomed Juliana into the family, the woman who had also warned her about Salvatore's darkness, his capacity for ruthlessness. Isabella, a staunch traditionalist, believed that Salvatore was making a mistake, that he was jeopardizing the family's power, their position, by embracing diplomacy and negotiation over violence and intimidation. She confronted Juliana, her voice cold and accusing. "You are changing him," she said. "You are weakening him. You are making him soft." Juliana met her gaze, her own expression calm and resolute. "I am helping him," she said. "I am helping him to build a better future. A future that is not defined by violence." Isabella scoffed, her eyes filled with disdain. "You are naive," she said. "You don't understand our world. You don't understand the price of loyalty, the price of power." "I understand more than you think," Juliana countered. "I understand that true loyalty comes not from fear, but from respect. And true power comes not from violence, but from intelligence, from love." Isabella looked at her, her expression unreadable. She saw the strength in Juliana, the determination, the unwavering belief in her vision. She saw the love she had for Salvatore, the love that had transformed him, the love that was changing their world. She realized that she had underestimated Juliana, that she was not just a naive outsider, but a force to be reckoned with, a woman who was capable of challenging the old ways, of forging a new path. "Perhaps," she said finally, her voice softening slightly, "you are right. Perhaps there is another way." It was a small concession, a tentative step towards acceptance, but it was a significant one. Isabella, the keeper of tradition, the guardian of the old ways, was beginning to see the possibility of change, the potential for a different kind of future. The price of loyalty and love was high, demanding sacrifice, courage, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Juliana and Salvatore were paying that price, navigating the treacherous waters of the underworld, fighting for their vision of a better future, a future where love and loyalty could coexist, where violence was not the only answer, where peace was a possibility, not just a dream. Their journey was far from over, but they were on the right path, guided by their love for each other, their commitment to their family, their unwavering belief in a better way. Chapter 13. Navigating the Treacherous Depths. The shift towards diplomacy and negotiation within the Costa family, spearheaded by Juliana and embraced by Salvatore, created a ripple effect, but it also generated resistance. Old grudges, deeply ingrained rivalries, and the inherent suspicion that permeated the Mafia world made the path to lasting peace treacherous and uncertain. One of the major challenges came from within the Costa family itself. While Salvatore's leadership was generally respected, there were factions, particularly among the older, more traditional members, who viewed his new approach as a betrayal of their values, a weakening of their power. They whispered dissent, plotted in secret, and waited for an opportunity to undermine his authority. Juliana, aware of these undercurrents, worked tirelessly to build bridges, to foster understanding, to convince the skeptics that a different way was possible, that peace and prosperity could coexist. She used her diplomatic skills, her growing influence, and her unwavering belief in Salvatore's vision to navigate these treacherous depths, to quell dissent, to maintain unity within the family. Salvatore, in turn, had to walk a fine line, balancing his commitment to change with the need to maintain the respect and loyalty of his men. He couldn't afford to alienate the traditionalists completely, to dismiss their concerns, to ignore their deeply ingrained beliefs. He had to demonstrate that his new approach was not a sign of weakness, but of strength, that diplomacy and negotiation were not a surrender, but a strategic maneuver, a way to achieve their goals without resorting to unnecessary violence. One evening, a crisis erupted. A shipment of illegal goods, a crucial part of the Costa family's business, was intercepted by the authorities. The information had clearly been leaked from within, pointing to another betrayal, another attempt to undermine Salvatore's leadership. The traditionalists seized the opportunity, demanding immediate and brutal retribution. They wanted blood, they wanted revenge, they wanted to send a message that the Costas were still a force to be reckoned with. Salvatore, facing immense pressure from his own ranks, found himself at a crossroads. He could revert to the old ways, unleash his fury, satisfy the bloodlust of his men, and maintain the illusion of strength through violence. Or he could stick to his new path, continue to pursue diplomacy and negotiation, and risk losing the respect and loyalty of the traditionalists, potentially triggering a civil war within his own family. He sought Juliana's counsel, his face etched with worry, his eyes reflecting the weight of the decision he had to make. "They want blood, Juliana," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "They want me to react, to show them that I am still in charge." Juliana listened intently, her mind racing, assessing the situation, considering the options. She knew that this was a crucial moment, a test of their leadership, a defining point in their journey. "Violence will only breed more violence, Salvatore," she said, her voice calm and resolute. "It will solve nothing. It will only perpetuate the cycle." She proposed an alternative, a daring plan that involved using their network of contacts, their intelligence-gathering capabilities, to identify the true culprit, to expose their treachery, to turn the tables on them without resorting to bloodshed. It was a risky strategy, one that required patience, cunning, and a deep understanding of the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that define the underworld. But it was also a chance to demonstrate the power of their new approach, to prove that diplomacy and negotiation could be more effective than brute force. Salvatore, trusting Juliana's judgment, her instincts, her unwavering belief in a better way, agreed to her plan. They worked together, tirelessly, gathering information, piecing together the puzzle, identifying the source of the leak, exposing the traitor. It turned out to be a member of a rival family, a man who had infiltrated the Costa organization, posing as a loyal soldier, while secretly working to undermine their operations. Juliana and Salvatore, using their combined skills, their intelligence, their network of contacts, managed to expose the traitor, to neutralize the threat, to recover the lost shipment, without firing a single shot. It was a victory, a testament to the power of their new approach, a demonstration that diplomacy and negotiation could be more effective than violence. They had navigated the treacherous depths of the Mafia world, overcome the resistance to change, and emerged stronger, more united, more committed to their vision of a better future. The path ahead was still uncertain, but they were on the right course, guided by their love for each other, their shared values, their unwavering belief in the possibility of peace. Chapter 14. The Scent of Betrayal and Blood. Despite their successes in navigating the treacherous currents of the Mafia world, a storm was brewing on the horizon. The old guard, those who clung to the traditions of violence and retribution, were not ready to relinquish their power, their influence. They saw Juliana's growing influence as a threat, Salvatore's embrace of diplomacy as a weakness, and they plotted in secret, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The leader of this faction was none other than Isabella Costa, Salvatore's aunt, the woman who had once seemed to offer Juliana a tentative acceptance. Isabella, driven by a deep-seated belief in the old ways, a fear of losing the family's power and prestige, had become convinced that Juliana was a dangerous influence, a corrupting force that was leading Salvatore astray. She orchestrated a plan, a cunning and ruthless scheme to eliminate Juliana, to remove her from the equation, to restore the Costa family to its former glory, its former reliance on violence and intimidation. She used her network of contacts, her influence within the family, to plant seeds of doubt, to spread rumors, to create an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. She manipulated events, created false evidence, and framed Juliana for a betrayal, a plot against the family. The scent of betrayal hung heavy in the air, mingling with the ever-present threat of blood. Juliana, sensing the danger, felt a growing unease, a sense of foreboding. She knew that she was walking on thin ice, that her enemies were closing in, that her life was in danger. She tried to warn Salvatore, to share her concerns, but he was distracted, preoccupied with business matters, with the ongoing negotiations with other families. He dismissed her fears, assuring her that she was safe, that he would protect her. "You are worrying too much, Juliana," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "No one would dare to harm you. You are my wife. You are untouchable." But Juliana knew better. She knew the ruthlessness of the Mafia world, the lengths to which people would go to protect their power, their interests. She knew that she was a target, a pawn in a dangerous game. One evening, while Salvatore was away on a business trip, Isabella made her move. She sent a group of assassins to the mansion to eliminate Juliana, to make it look like an accident, a random act of violence. Juliana, alone in the mansion, found herself trapped, surrounded by enemies. She fought back, using her wits, her courage, her resourcefulness to evade the assassins, to protect herself. She used the hidden passages, the secret rooms, the knowledge of the mansion she had gained during her time there to outmaneuver her attackers. She fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to protect herself, to protect the life she had built with Salvatore. The mansion, once a symbol of her captivity, became her battleground, the scene of a desperate struggle for survival. The scent of blood, her own and that of her attackers, filled the air, mingling with the scent of fear, of adrenaline, of the desperate fight for life. She managed to escape, to flee the mansion, to seek refuge in the city, in the anonymity of the crowded streets. She was wounded, bruised, battered, but she was alive. She knew that she couldn't go to the authorities, that she couldn't trust anyone, that she was alone, hunted, a fugitive in her own world. She had to find Salvatore, to warn him, to expose Isabella's treachery, to fight for their future, for their love. The scent of betrayal and blood was a stark reminder of the dangers they faced, of the price of loyalty and love in the treacherous world of the Mafia. The storm had broken, and Juliana was caught in the middle of it, fighting for her life, fighting for her love, fighting for her future. Chapter 15. Where Shadows Meet the Dawn. Juliana, wounded and alone, navigated the labyrinthine streets of New York, a city that had once been her refuge, now a hunting ground. She knew she couldn't stay in any one place for long, that Isabella's assassins would be searching for her, that every shadow held a potential threat. Her first instinct was to contact Salvatore, but she knew that she couldn't trust the usual channels of communication. Isabella's reach was long, her influence pervasive, and any attempt to reach Salvatore directly could be intercepted, leading her enemies straight to her. She needed to find a way to contact him discreetly, to warn him about Isabella's betrayal, to expose the plot against her. She thought of Marco, her former mentor in the art world, the man who had unwittingly helped her facilitate the meeting with Lorenzo Moretti. Marco was outside the Mafia world, a civilian, someone she could trust, someone who could potentially reach Salvatore without raising suspicion. She found a public phone, a relic from a bygone era, and dialed Marco's number, her heart pounding in her chest. "Marco," she said, her voice hoarse and trembling, "it's Juliana. I need your help." She explained the situation, the attack, Isabella's betrayal, the danger she was in. She asked him to contact Salvatore, to relay a message, a coded message that only he would understand. Tell him, she said, that the rose has thorns, and the thorns are poisoned. It was a reference to their early conversations, to the symbolism of the rose, the flower that represented their marriage, their love, a love that had blossomed in the darkness, amidst the thorns of the Mafia world. Marco, shocked and concerned, agreed to help. He promised to contact Salvatore, to deliver the message, to do everything he could to assist her. Juliana, relieved that she had found a lifeline, a potential way to reach Salvatore, sought refuge in a small, nondescript hotel, a place where she could blend in, where she could rest, where she could tend to her wounds. She cleaned her injuries, bandaged her cuts, and tried to get some sleep, but her mind was racing, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear, anxiety, and a desperate longing for Salvatore. She thought of their life together, the challenges they had faced, the victories they had shared, the love that had grown between them, a love that had defied the odds, a love that was now threatened by the treachery of his own family. She drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by nightmares, by visions of violence, of betrayal, of loss. She saw Isabella's face, her cold, calculating eyes, her ruthless determination to eliminate her. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, her body aching, her spirit bruised but not broken. She knew that she couldn't give up, that she had to fight, that she had to survive, for herself, for Salvatore, for their future. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the city, Juliana felt a renewed sense of determination. She had to find a way to reach Salvatore, to expose Isabella's plot, to save their lives, their love. She left the hotel, venturing back into the streets, a city that was both familiar and alien, a place of refuge and danger. She was a shadow, moving through the dawn, seeking the light, seeking her love, seeking her salvation. The meeting of shadows and dawn mirrored her own journey, a journey through darkness and towards a hope of a brighter future, a future she was determined to fight for, no matter the cost. Chapter 16. The Unfolding of Fateful Wings. Marco, true to his word, managed to contact Salvatore, relaying Juliana's cryptic message. Salvatore, initially stunned by the news of the attack and Isabella's betrayal, was consumed by a mixture of fury and fear. He had been so focused on the external threats, on the negotiations with other families, that he had failed to see the danger lurking within his own ranks, the treachery of his own aunt. He immediately mobilized his most trusted men, ordering them to find Juliana, to protect her, to bring her back to him. He also initiated an investigation into Isabella's actions, gathering evidence, uncovering the extent of her plot, preparing to confront her. He knew that he couldn't act rashly, that he couldn't simply unleash his fury, that he had to be strategic, calculating, to ensure Juliana's safety and to maintain the stability of the family. Juliana, meanwhile, continued to navigate the city, a fugitive in her own world, relying on her instincts, her resourcefulness, to evade her pursuers. She knew that she couldn't stay hidden forever, that she had to find a way to expose Isabella's treachery, to clear her name, to reunite with Salvatore. She decided to use her knowledge of the art world, her connections, to her advantage. She knew that Isabella had a fondness for a particular artist, a reclusive painter whose work was highly sought after by collectors, including many members of the Mafia elite. She devised a plan, a daring and risky scheme to lure Isabella into a trap, to expose her publicly, to force a confrontation. She used her contacts in the art world to spread rumors, to create a buzz about a newly discovered painting by the reclusive artist, a painting that was supposedly up for sale. She knew that Isabella, with her passion for art and her desire to maintain her status, would be unable to resist the opportunity to acquire such a valuable piece. She arranged a meeting, a secret rendezvous at a discreet art gallery, a place where she could control the environment, where she could set the stage for her confrontation with Isabella. She informed Salvatore of her plan, providing him with the details, the location, the time. She knew that it was a dangerous gamble, that she was putting herself in harm's way, but she was determined to fight for her life, for her love, for her future. Salvatore, initially hesitant, concerned for her safety, ultimately agreed to her plan. He admired her courage, her resourcefulness, her unwavering determination. He knew that she was not just his wife, she was his partner, his equal, a woman who was capable of fighting her own battles. He mobilized his men, positioning them strategically around the gallery, ready to intervene if necessary, ready to protect Juliana, ready to confront Isabella. The stage was set, the trap was laid, the fateful wings of destiny were unfolding. Juliana, dressed in a simple but elegant disguise, waited in the gallery, her heart pounding, her senses on high alert, ready for the confrontation, ready for the showdown with the woman who had tried to destroy her life. The unfolding of these events felt like the spreading of wings, a flight into the unknown, a test of courage and love, a moment that would determine the course of their future. Chapter 17. Embracing the Flame of Rebellion. Isabella arrived at the gallery, accompanied by 2 of her loyal guards, her expression a mixture of anticipation and suspicion. She was expecting to see a priceless work of art, a masterpiece that would enhance her collection, solidify her status. Instead, she found Juliana, the woman she had tried to eliminate, standing before her, a figure of defiance and determination. "Juliana," Isabella said, her voice cold and surprised. "What is the meaning of this?" Juliana met her gaze, her own expression unwavering. "You know very well what this is about, Isabella," she said. "It's about your treachery, your betrayal, your attempt to murder me." Isabella scoffed, her eyes filled with disdain.
"You are delusional," she said.
"I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't play innocent with me, Isabella," Juliana countered. "I know everything. I know about your plot, your assassins, your lies." She presented the evidence, the information she had gathered, the witnesses she had lined up, exposing Isabella's treachery, her duplicity, her attempt to seize power. Isabella, realizing that she had been exposed, that her carefully constructed plan had unraveled, dropped the pretense of innocence. Her face contorted with rage, her eyes blazing with fury. "You were a mistake, Juliana," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "A weakness. A liability. You were corrupting Salvatore, turning him soft." "I was helping him," Juliana retorted. "I was helping him to build a better future. A future that is not defined by violence." "There is no other future for us," Isabella hissed. "Only power. Only strength. Only the old ways." She signaled to her guards, ordering them to attack Juliana, to silence her, to eliminate the threat she posed. But before they could react, Salvatore and his men emerged from the shadows, surrounding Isabella and her guards, their weapons drawn, their expressions grim. "It's over, Isabella," Salvatore said, his voice cold and resolute. "Your reign of terror is finished." Isabella, realizing that she had been outmaneuvered, that she had lost, stared at Salvatore, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and disappointment. "You have chosen her," she said, her voice trembling with emotion.
"Over your own family.
"Over your own blood." "I have chosen love," Salvatore replied. "Over hate." "I have chosen peace." "Over violence." "I have chosen a future." "Over the past." He ordered his men to disarm Isabella and her guards, to take them into custody. He had decided to spare her life, to avoid further bloodshed, to break the cycle of violence that had plagued their family for generations. He would exile her, banish her from their world, strip her of her power, her influence, her status. It was a punishment that was both merciful and just, a way to end her reign of terror without resorting to the brutal methods of the past. Juliana, watching the scene unfold, felt a surge of relief, of triumph, of love for Salvatore. He had stood by her, protected her, believed in her. He had chosen her, chosen their love, chosen their future. They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. They had faced the storm, weathered the betrayal, emerged stronger, more united, more in love than ever before. Juliana had embraced the flame of rebellion, challenged the old ways, fought for her vision of a better future. She had proven her strength, her courage, her loyalty, her love. She was no longer just the Don's reluctant bride. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had transformed their world, a woman who had earned her place by Salvatore's side, as his equal, his partner, his love. Chapter 18. The Tempest of Broken Vows. Isabella's exile, while a necessary step, did not bring immediate peace. Her loyalists, scattered and disgruntled, continued to pose a threat, whispering dissent, plotting revenge, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. The underworld, a volatile and unpredictable landscape, was still rife with tension, with old grudges, with the ever-present threat of violence. Juliana and Salvatore, aware of the lingering dangers, worked tirelessly to consolidate their power, to strengthen their alliances, to build a more stable and secure future. They continued to promote diplomacy and negotiation, to foster understanding between rival families, to create a sense of shared purpose, a common goal of peace and prosperity. But the past, like a relentless storm, refused to be silenced. Isabella, despite her exile, continued to exert her influence, using her network of contacts, her knowledge of the family's secrets, to undermine Salvatore's leadership, to sow discord, to fuel the flames of rebellion. She orchestrated a series of attacks, targeting the Costa family's businesses, their allies, their interests. The attacks were subtle, indirect, designed to create chaos, to destabilize their operations, to erode their power. The tempest of broken vows, of betrayed trust, of lingering resentment, raged around them, threatening to consume their hard-won peace, their fragile stability. Juliana and Salvatore found themselves once again on the defensive, fighting to protect their family, their business, their love. They faced a difficult choice. They could revert to the old ways, unleash their fury, respond to violence with violence, and risk plunging the underworld back into a bloody war. Or they could continue to pursue diplomacy and negotiation, to seek a peaceful resolution and risk appearing weak, vulnerable, inviting further attacks. They chose the latter, believing that violence was not the answer, that it would only perpetuate the cycle of hatred and bloodshed. They used their intelligence, their network of contacts, their growing influence to identify Isabella's collaborators, to expose their plots, to neutralize their threats. They reached out to the other families, appealing to their sense of reason, their self-preservation, their desire for a stable and prosperous future. They offered concessions, made compromises, forged new alliances, building a coalition of support, a united front against Isabella's machinations. It was a long and arduous process, a constant battle against the forces of darkness, the remnants of the past. But Juliana and Salvatore, united in their love, their commitment, their vision, persevered. They faced betrayals, setbacks, disappointments, but they never gave up, never lost hope, never wavered in their belief that a better future was possible. One evening, a crucial piece of information came to light. A document, a secret agreement between Isabella and a rival family, a plot to assassinate Salvatore and seize control of the Costa Empire. The document was irrefutable proof of Isabella's treachery, her ultimate betrayal. It was the evidence they needed to finally silence her, to end her reign of terror, to secure their future. They presented the document to the heads of the other families, exposing Isabella's plot, demonstrating the threat she posed to them all. The families, shocked and outraged by Isabella's actions, turned against her, withdrawing their support, condemning her treachery. Isabella, isolated and exposed, her power shattered, her influence destroyed, was finally defeated. The tempest of broken vows, the storm of betrayal, began to subside, giving way to a glimmer of hope, a promise of peace. Juliana and Salvatore, battered but not broken, had weathered the storm, emerged stronger, more united, more in love than ever before. Their journey was far from over, but they had overcome a major obstacle, a significant threat, paving the way for a more stable and secure future. Chapter 19. Beyond the Reach of Darkness. With Isabella's final defeat, a new era dawned for the Costa family and, to a significant extent, for the entire New York underworld. The old ways, the traditions of violence and retribution, were not entirely eradicated, but they were significantly diminished, replaced by a growing emphasis on diplomacy, negotiation, and cooperation. Juliana and Salvatore, recognized as the architects of this new order, became figures of respect and influence, their leadership acknowledged, their vision embraced by many. They continued to work tirelessly, building bridges between families, fostering understanding, promoting a culture of peace and prosperity. They focused on diversifying the family's business interests, moving away from illegal activities, investing in legitimate ventures, creating opportunities for their people, building a sustainable future. Juliana, using her knowledge of the art world, her connections, her passion for beauty and creativity, established a foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting young artists, to promoting cultural exchange, to fostering a sense of community. Salvatore, embracing his role as a leader, a visionary, a peacemaker, worked to reform the internal structures of the Mafia, creating a more transparent and accountable system, reducing corruption, promoting fairness, ensuring the well-being of his people. They also focused on their personal lives, on their relationship, on the love that had blossomed in the darkness, the love that had sustained them through the trials and tribulations of their journey. They spent more time together, sharing quiet moments, intimate conversations, strengthening the bond that had been forged in the crucible of conflict and betrayal. They traveled, explored new places, experienced new cultures, expanding their horizons, embracing the world beyond the confines of their former lives. They rediscovered the simple joys of life, the beauty of nature, the power of human connection, the importance of family and friends. They found solace in art, in music, in literature, in the shared experience of beauty and creativity. One evening, while they were walking through the gardens of their estate, the scent of roses filling the air, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Salvatore turned to Juliana, his eyes filled with love and gratitude. "You saved me, Juliana," he said, his voice soft and sincere. "You showed me a different way. You brought light into my darkness." Juliana smiled, her heart overflowing with love for him. "We saved each other, Salvatore," she said. "We found a different way. Together." They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. They had journeyed beyond the reach of darkness, beyond the shadows of their past, beyond the violence and betrayal that had defined their world. They had built a new life, a new future, a future based on love, on trust, on respect, on a shared commitment to peace and prosperity. They were still the Don and his former reluctant bride, but they were also so much more. They were partners, lovers, soulmates, bound together by a love that had conquered all, a love that had transformed their world, a love that would endure, beyond the reach of darkness, forever. The future was uncertain, as life always is, but they faced it together, with courage, with hope, with the unwavering belief in the power of their love. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Despite the progress they had made, the peace they had forged, a final challenge remained. The remnants of Isabella's faction, though scattered and weakened, refused to surrender completely. A small group of die-hard loyalists, fueled by resentment and a thirst for revenge, plotted one last, desperate attempt to destabilize the Costa family, to reclaim their lost power. They planned a coordinated attack, a series of targeted strikes against the Costa family's businesses and key personnel, designed to create chaos, to sow fear, to undermine Salvatore's leadership. They also planned to assassinate Juliana, believing that her removal would cripple Salvatore, break his spirit, and pave the way for their return to power. The information about the planned attack came from an unexpected source, a former member of Isabella's faction who, disillusioned by the violence and the endless cycle of revenge, had decided to switch sides, to betray his former comrades. He contacted Juliana directly, warning her about the imminent threat, providing her with details about the planned attacks, the identities of the conspirators, the timing of their operation. Juliana, faced with this new challenge, this final confrontation, knew that she had to act quickly, decisively. She informed Salvatore, sharing the information she had received, outlining the danger they faced. They decided to use this information to their advantage, to set a trap for the conspirators, to neutralize the threat before it could materialize. They worked together, meticulously planning their response, coordinating their forces, preparing for the final showdown. They alerted their allies, mobilized their security teams, strengthened their defenses, preparing for the storm that was about to break. They also decided to confront the conspirators directly, to expose their plot, to offer them a chance to surrender, to avoid further bloodshed. The final confrontation took place at a deserted warehouse, a symbol of the old ways, the dark underbelly of the Mafia world. Juliana and Salvatore, accompanied by their most trusted men, faced the remnants of Isabella's faction, a group of hardened criminals, desperate and determined to fight to the bitter end. The air was thick with tension, with the threat of violence, with the weight of past betrayals, of lingering resentments. Juliana, standing by Salvatore's side, her expression calm and resolute, addressed the conspirators, her voice echoing through the cavernous space.
"You have a choice," she said.
"You can surrender now and face justice. Or you can continue down this path of violence and face the consequences." The conspirators, led by a ruthless and fanatical lieutenant of Isabella's, refused to surrender. They launched their attack, a desperate and furious assault, determined to kill Juliana and Salvatore, to destroy the Costa family. A fierce battle erupted, a clash of wills, a fight for survival. Gunfire echoed through the warehouse, the air filled with the scent of gunpowder, of blood, of death. Juliana, fighting alongside Salvatore, displayed a courage and a resourcefulness that surprised even herself. She had come a long way from the reluctant bride, the art restorer who had been thrust into this violent world. She had become a warrior, a protector, a leader. Salvatore, fighting with the ferocity of a cornered lion, protected Juliana, defended his family, his love. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled violence, a man determined to protect what was his. The battle raged, lives were lost, sacrifices were made. But in the end, Juliana and Salvatore, supported by their loyal men, prevailed. The conspirators were defeated, their plot foiled, their threat neutralized. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties had ended in victory, a victory that had been hard-won, a victory that had cost them dearly, but a victory that had secured their future, their love, their peace. They stood together, amidst the wreckage of the battle, their bodies bruised, their spirits weary, but their hearts united, their love stronger than ever. They had faced the ultimate test, the final challenge, and they had emerged victorious, ready to embrace the future, a future they had fought so hard to create. Epilogue. Years passed. The scars of the past, both physical and emotional, remained, but they served as reminders of the battles fought, the victories won, the love that had endured. Juliana and Salvatore, older, wiser, their hair streaked with silver, continued to lead the Costa family, their influence extending far beyond the confines of the New York underworld. They had successfully transitioned the family's business interests into legitimate ventures, creating a diversified and thriving empire built on ethical principles, on sustainable practices, on a commitment to social responsibility. The foundation Juliana had established flourished, supporting countless young artists, fostering creativity, promoting cultural exchange, making a real difference in the world. Salvatore, true to his word, had reformed the internal structures of the Mafia, creating a more transparent and accountable system, reducing corruption, promoting fairness, ensuring the well-being of his people. The old ways, the traditions of violence and retribution, had not been entirely eradicated, but they were significantly diminished, replaced by a growing emphasis on diplomacy, negotiation, and cooperation. They had children, a son and a daughter, who grew up in a world vastly different from the one their parents had inherited. They were raised with love, with respect, with a strong sense of values, with a commitment to making a positive impact on the world. Juliana and Salvatore often reflected on their journey, on the reluctant bride who had become a powerful leader, on the ruthless Dawn who had found redemption in love, on the transformation they had achieved together. They remembered the challenges they had faced, the betrayals they had endured, the sacrifices they had made, the love that had sustained them through it all. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their estate, overlooking the city lights, the same view that had once represented Juliana's captivity, now a symbol of their freedom, their love, their legacy, Salvatore took Juliana's hand, his touch gentle and loving. "We did it, Juliana," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We built a better world." Juliana smiled, her eyes meeting his, her heart overflowing with love for him. "We did it together," she said. They sat in silence, their hands clasped, their hearts connected, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest of worlds, love can blossom, hope can endure, and a better future is always possible. They had faced the shadows, embraced the dawn, and created a legacy of love, of peace, of lasting change. Their story, a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of the human spirit, was complete.